So, welcome everybody to the third and final Wordsmith product training session. I'm Rob, same person been taking you through the other two sessions. Today's agenda will go over the homework. So, I sent you guys, I know we had a pretty big gap between sessions one and two, so I sent you the homework from session one and two. We can cover that, and then we will take a quick look at the training roadmap, which basically just says we're at the end of the line, and we'll spend the majority of our time in that example and demo portion, just like we've done in the previous sessions. And in this time, we're going to focus on user selections on the dashboard and how to account for those in our narrative so that they match up when somebody makes a selection. Then once we do all of that, I'll go over a quick overview of how to QA our template, some of the tools that you have available, and then a few additional tips and resources that are handy to have just to get you off on the right foot. And then you guys will be all trained up and ready to roll. So as far as the homework, when I sent over the recap from last training, I had the session one homework and then the session two homework. If you actually worked through that, you would have seen with the session two questions, you basically saw the answers to the first set of homework questions. And so the first set was just asking you to pull some insights using the calc builder to answer four different questions. And then the second session was asking you to take those insights and improve upon them using the branching best practices that we learned in session two. And so the four things that we asked you to do here was take the question of how many directors worked on the TV series, correct that for one director versus multiples. For the percentage of summer battles with a major death or capture, we asked you to do a null check to make sure all the relevant values were there. And then, and actually this is kind of weird, let me just pull up this here. There we go. So we wanted you to show if there was a large difference between summer and winter, add only in front of the smaller value, and then for a minimal difference, split those up into two separate sentences. Um, for the episode with the most notable deaths, we wanted you to branch for tie handling in case there are multiple episodes with the same number. And then for the last one, which was probably the toughest one, the season with the highest average IMDb rating and number of viewers, we wanted you to implement a branch to account for the fact that the number of viewers may be less than 1 million. And so we can see that the answers to the first session are basically right here. It's like how many different directors worked on the TV series. There were 19 different ones that worked on it. And then we wanted to implement a branch to correct that grammar for one director. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into an account here. And I'm just basically just working through the homework because you can't just really show a number. So I just wanted to show you how I set these branches up to give you an idea, kind of how that would work out. So for that first one, our initial insight showed the number of different directors that worked on it. So like 19 different directors worked on the TV series. And then we had a variable called unique directors. And so I just created a branch to say if that equals one, then we would just write only one director worked on the TV series, as you can see here in the preview. If it's more than one, it's just going to list out the number of different directors worked on the TV series. So now we've accounted for one or more than one. For that second question about what percentage of summer battles had a major death or capture, and then the winter battles, we found that 62% of the summer battles had a major death or capture, and 18% of the winter battles also had a major death or capture. And so here, we wanted to do a null check to make sure all relevant values were there, and then again, add only in front of the smaller value if it's less than 30% difference, or greater than 30% difference, sorry. And then less than 10%, split them up into two sentences. And so the way I worked that is I highlighted my entire insight where I pointed out the percentages. And then the first thing I did is my null check because we don't want to write this if we don't have all the relevant values because we are calculating percentages. So if any of the values we're using to get those percentages is null, obviously it's not going to work. And so I did a null check to make sure that the number of summer battles with a death or capture and the total number of summer battles is not null. That's how we got the percentage of summer battles. Just divided the ones with death or capture by the total number. And the same thing for winter, the ones with the death or capture and the total winter battles. Divide those to get the percentage of winter battles. So we want to make sure all four of those values are not null so that we're actually going to get our percentages. Otherwise, there's no point in writing this insight if the percentages are not there. And so it's only going to write this if that's true. None of those are null. And then as far as the branching to account for these values, we said if the percentage difference is greater than 30%, put only in front of the smaller value. And so I created a branch here just to say, look at the percentage of summer battles, subtract the winter battles. If that's greater than 0.3 or 30%, then we're going to add the word only. And then if that is not, since that's an optional branch, if that is not true, it would just drop out and it would still say, whereas, 40% or whatever battles did. So that's only going to show up if the difference is greater than 30%. Then the other one, if the difference was less than 10%, we wanted to, not less than 10%. There's minimal difference between summer and winter, less than 10%, remove that conjunction. And so basically we said if the percent of summer battles minus the winter battle percent is less than 10%, we're going to split it up into two sentences here. 62% of battles had a major death or capture, period. 18% of winter battles did. So write that two separate sentences instead of one like you see in the top. For the third question, where we asked which episode had the most notable deaths and how many, the original answer from session 1 would have been with 11 deaths. The Winds of Winter had the most notable deaths of any episode. And then the branching best practice we ask you to implement here is tie handling. So we want to see, are there maybe 2 or more episodes that have the same number of notable deaths? And so that's basically something that we covered in the last session. And if you remember to find out if there's a tie, generally you need to do another calculation and create a list instead of a single text variable. And so if I look here in my branch, in my initial one, where I said with 11 deaths, the Winds of Winter had the most notable deaths, I have a variable called episode with the most notable deaths. And that's a calc that I would have created to find that value. However, in my second branch here, I have a variable called episode with most notable deaths list. So just like we did in session 2, where we were trying to find, was there a tie between our attacker king values, and we had to create a list of attacker kings that matched the best win percentage, and it would list out however many. Same thing here. We created a list of episodes with the most notable deaths and said, if any episodes match the maximum number, which in this case was 11, it would list them out. And then we just do a count of that list, and we say if it equals 1, which means there's only one episode, so there's no tie, we can keep our insight the same. And then if the count is greater than 1, then we know that there is a tie. And since this is a list, it's going to list out 2, 3, however many episodes there would happen to be. So it might say, with 11 deaths, the Winds of Winter and the Battle of Winterfell had the most notable deaths out of all episodes in the series. Versus up here, where if it's just 1, we say had the most notable deaths of any episode. So we're going to change up the wording and insert the list if there happens to be more than one that matches. And then finally, the one for number 4, we ask you to find which season had the highest IMDb rating and which season had the highest average number of viewers. And so that was season 4 had the highest IMDb rating at 9.33, and season 7 had the most viewers at 10.3 million on average. And then the branching best practice that we asked you to do is to account for the fact that what if those viewers are less than 1 million? So, however many hundreds of thousands or X thousands. And this one was a little trickier. It did actually require creating a formula to get this correct. So if we come in here and take a look why, when I look at my variable for the number of viewers in the millions per season, we can see that it says like right here 10.3, and then in the data table that 10.3 represents 10.3 million. And so anything 1 or above would be in the millions: 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, as we see here. Anything less than 1 would be less than a million. So 0.8 would be 800,000. And so if I just came here and said, if the number of viewers per season is greater than or equal to 1, I'm just going to write it out as normal, however many million. And then if it's less than 1, if I wrote, just like this, 10.3 thousand, or in this case, it would say maybe 0.8 thousand. That's not how anybody would write 800,000, or even if I put like 0.8 million, that doesn't really sound like a person is going to write it. So we needed to find a way for it to show up as like 800,000, let's say. And so the way we accomplish that is I created a formula where I said, let's take that number of viewers, which is in the millions, and we're going to multiply that by 1,000. And then I inserted that formula variable here instead of the regular number of viewers in the millions. And I said, if that variable for viewers in the millions is less than 1, insert the product of that formula, and then I just put a K out next to it for thousands. And then so you can see how that's going to work. If I open my preview over here, right now we see that the number of viewers is 10.3 million. But if I pop in here in my data tester and we say if this is less than 1, it's going to be however many 100,000. So let's just do like that 0.8 example I was just using. So now we've made it less than 1. And instead of saying 0.8 million, which again sounds pretty weird, because of the formula is multiplying it by 1,000, it's going to take that 0.8, multiply by 1,000, add the K, and now we get 800,000 instead of 0.8 million, which again does not sound like a human being would ever write. So that one again was a little trickier, but hopefully we got there. And it did require us to create that formula and do a little math so that it would show up correctly. And then the branching you can see is just greater than 1, write it out normal, less than 1, use the formula. All right. So that is basically it for the homework. And we'll just pop through these. Okay, onto the training roadmap. We are at the end. Again, this session is going to focus entirely on user selections and advanced branching. Basically, when someone makes a selection on our dashboard, how do we account for that, and how do we branch so that everything makes sense based on that individual selection? And so before we start working on our branches or updating our insights, whenever you're trying to account for user selection, basically the first thing you want to do is you want to assess the filters and the selection options that are currently on your dashboard. And so you just want to kind of look over the dashboard and say, what are people going to click on? What are we asking them to click on? What is being filtered? What is not being filtered? All of that's going to affect the data that's passed over to Wordsmith. For any visualizations that are not filtered, such as these two here from my dashboard, if someone makes a selection, because we're not filtering that data, it's not going to change what's being sent to Wordsmith. So any insights pulling from these visualizations don't really need to be updated, because making a selection is not going to affect what is being output in the narrative. However, with the two over here, where we're actually calling out for someone to make a selection for the attacker king or click on a house for more detail, we can see the little filter icon is lit up. They are filtered. So if someone makes a selection, it's going to filter that data that's being sent to Wordsmith to only whatever selection they've clicked on. So say I click on one of these attacker kings, it's going to only send over attacker king data for whoever I have selected, which of course is going to affect any of the insights that we have pulling from this visualization, which are a couple that we've already done based on the who had the highest win percentage, as well as the one talking about the battles that they fought in. If we make a selection here, that's going to change. And whoops, I thought I had my Tableau open. Let me open that up real quick. And then if you remember from the dashboard as well, we had a third option where, go ahead and pull our extension in. Once I select a king, I also get a pop-up here of the different battles that they fought in, and I can also make a selection for one of these battles. And that's also filtered, so that's another one that we're going to have to consider. So our insight where we're talking about the king and the battles they fought, we have two different selections here that we're going to have to account for. And so you kind of just want to take stock of that. It's not like anything you have to do up front. You just want to take stock and remind yourself, okay, I'm pulling, these insights come from this visualization. They're going to change if somebody makes a selection. I need to account for that. These are not. I can basically ignore any insights that are only pulling from the unfiltered visualizations. And so if we go through and we take a look at the insights that we created in our last session, the first one here where we talked about the number of notable deaths from seasons based on books, Those are coming from the notable deaths and the death by book visualizations. Both are unfiltered, so they're not affected by user selection. Those can remain unchanged, stay just as they are. If someone clicks, it's not going to affect those at all. Same thing for this one. We're also talking about the books and the number of deaths. So they're pulling from those unfiltered visualizations, can remain unchanged. And finally, the one here about the number of directors per episodes, they also do not pull from any of the filtered visualizations, so that one can remain unchanged. However, when we get to the fourth one that we wrote, where we talk about, this particular king was the most successful. He fought against this number of defender kings in that number of battles. That is pulling from the attacker king visualization, which we know is filtered. And so we're going to need to account for that selection and update our insight accordingly. And so originally we wrote out, this king was the most successful, fought against this many defenders in 7 battles. Basically what we're going to do here is we're going to update this to say the king, we're going to remove the part that I have struck out. So we're just going to say this king fought against this many defenders in this many battles. So we're going to leave that in. And we can still use these previous calculations that we've already created, because we created a calculation to say, who is the best attacker king, who has the highest win percentage. And that's what populates our name here in our insight. If we click on the dashboard and we select a king, it's going to filter that data down to only the selected king, who by default is then going to have the highest win percentage because he's the only one whose data is being passed over. And then these other 2 calculations reference the top win percentage from the best attacker king. And so when someone makes a selection, all 3 of these calculations that we've previously done are still going to work. So we can keep most of that original insight, just take out this bit of wording because I just want to change up how it says. And then I'm going to add 2 additional sentences below where I'm going to say, as an attacking king, he tends to engage in this particular battle type with a whatever % success rate. So I'm going to find what's his most common battle type and his percentage of success in that battle. Talk about that. And then we're also going to talk about if he's on the defense, what is his win percentage there? So as the attacker, here's his win percentage. As a defender, here's his win percentage on that side. And so when we're going to update this, the first thing we need to do is decide what selection do we need to account for. And in this case, it's the selection of the attacker king from the dashboard. And then we also may need to pull some additional data type points to account for these additional variables that I'm adding in my new sentences. And so the data points we want to account for are, has an attacker king been selected? So did someone actually click on the dashboard? And then we also need to find the most common battle type and the success rate of that battle type, so we can fill in these 2 variables, as well as the win percentage as a defender king to fill in that last variable. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump back into our actual account. Here's our training, exactly where it was when we left off. So we know that we're going to ignore these first 3 because they are not changed at all by user selection. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get those out of the way so they're not cluttering up our view. And I'll drop them down here. I don't want to erase them, just for preservation's sake, but we'll just drop them down kind of out of our way so they don't mess us up with what we're focusing on. All right, and so our first insight that we're going to work on here is the one where we've identified our most successful attacker king. And so if we looked at our slide, first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and just pull out this verbiage so that the first part of the insight is already set. I'll click in here, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and grab this insight and boom. All right, and so we said take that part out, and now we've identified our king and the number of defenders and battles that he fought in. So that's all matching up with what I had in my slide. And then I need to add those 2 additional sentences to kind of flesh out my insight. I'm going to just paste those in. All right. So now that I have it written out, it's time to start pulling these data points. So the first thing we'll do is determine, has an attacker king been selected? So we need to create a calc to let us know, did someone click on that dashboard and select a king from our list? And so anytime you're trying to assess user selection on a dashboard, there's a pretty simple calculation you can use to account for that. And so I'm going to jump back over here to the Calculate tab. And I'm going to go down to my battle data worksheet. I'm going to go ahead and create a new calc. And so we know when someone clicks on the attacker king visualization, it's going to filter that data down by attacker king. And so basically, I just want to see, has someone made a unique selection in that attacker king visualization? And so to do that, I'm going to go ahead and use the unique function on the attacker king column, and that's going to remove any duplicates and have only the unique values for that column. Go ahead and say unique on the attacker king. So now I have just the unique values from that column. Then I'm going to do an aggregation, and we're just going to do a count of the items in that column, which we had 5 kings, so that's going to give us 5. And so now, once we save this, if we branch, well, let's not talk through it. Let's just go ahead and do it. So I'll call this the unique attacker king count. Go ahead and save that calc. And now if I come back out here to the right tab, I can highlight this entire narrative or insight, and we only want to write this if someone has selected an attacker king from our dashboard. And so once I have selected the whole thing, I'm going to hit add a branch, and then I'm going to say, let's look at that unique attacker king count. Does it equal 1? If that equals 1, then we know that someone has clicked and filtered that list of kings down to the one that they have selected. If it's more than 1, then there has not been a selection, so we don't want to write this. And so that's basically how simple it is to say, did someone click something on my dashboard and make a unique selection? For whatever item you want to look for, get the unique values, count them up, and then write a branch to say, if that count equals 1, write my insight, because I know that it's only going to equal 1 when they've made a unique selection. And there's actually a second way that we can go about doing this. Let me go ahead and add another rule just to show you another way. I can also take this unique attacker king count we got to do a different calc. So there's 2 ways we can go about it. The way we just did it, where you do an aggregate count and then say, does that count equal 1? Or if I come back to my battle data worksheet, let's create a new calc. And maybe I'll call this unique attacker king list. So we can also create a list of our attacker kings. So you're basically going to do the very similar steps. I'm going to take the unique values for attacker king, and then this is already in a list format because it has a list of kings. And so at this point, I can just save that list. And now for my branch, instead of doing the count and saying if that equals 1, I could also use my list and then do a count of that list and say, does that equal 1? And those are both going to do the exact same thing. So I could do a sum of the column and then say, does it equal 1? Or I can just leave it in list form and then do a count of that list. Does that count equal 1? Both of those are going to show you a unique selection, because once they filter it down, it's going to equal 1. They both work exactly the same way. It's just a matter of preference, whichever one you like. Some people like working with lists. Some people like to do the aggregate. Doesn't really matter. They both do the same thing. But I wanted to show you both ways to do that. And so that's really all there is to saying, did someone make a unique selection? Now that we know it equals 1, we know they've made a unique selection. So we've now accounted for the selection on our dashboard. The next thing we need to do is go ahead and pull out these 3 other data points so that we can flesh out our insight before we apply our branching best practices to it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit done here. And I'm going to need to create a couple of additional calcs to find those data points. So I'm going to come back over to the Calculate tab. I'm going to go back down to my battle data worksheet. And so the first thing I want to find is the most common battle type, because that was the next thing that we had in our list. What's his most common battle type? And so here in my battle data worksheet, I'm going to create a new calc, and I'll just call it common battle type. Okay, and the first thing I want to do here is I want to make sure, first of all, that my battle type is not null, because I want to only deal with battles where we know the type. And so I'm going to filter this table. And I'm going to say, let's make sure that battle type is not null. Go ahead and save that step. So now I'm only dealing with battles where I know the type. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the group function, which gives me the unique values in a column, but it also allows me the opportunity to aggregate upon those. Whereas unique only gives me the unique values, group gives me unique values and lets me aggregate on a separate column. So I'm going to group these up. I'm going to say let's group by the battle type. And then I'm going to aggregate by doing a count of the names of those battles. So that should give me the unique battle types and the number of times each one occurred. Go ahead and save that step. And that's exactly what we get. Here are the different battle types and the number of times each one occurred. So if I'm looking for the most common battle type, obviously that would be the one with the highest number. And so the next thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and sort this. I'm going to sort on that count column in descending order. It's going to put the highest one at the top. And then I'm going to use our first in function to only keep that first row, because I'm only looking for the most common or the one with the highest number. And so now we've identified the most common battle type and how many times it occurs. So I'll go ahead and save that calc. And then I also need to have a calc where I've isolated just the battle type name. And so I'm going to go ahead and come back down here to my battle data worksheet. Here's that common battle type calc I just saved. I'm actually going to make a copy of that. I'm going to call this common battle type name. And then we have all of our steps that we previously did. I still have the type and the count. And so here I'm just going to use my select function. And I'm going to save just that battle type name because I don't need the count for this particular calc. And the reason I'm going to do this is I'm going to use a filter here in a bit, and I'm going to filter based on that most common battle type. And so if you remember from a previous session when we did filtering, you can only use a calc in a filter if it's saved as a single row, single column. My previous calc had two columns, the type and the number, and so I need to whittle this down to the single row, single column so that I can use this in an upcoming filter. And so I'm going to go ahead and save that. And so now I have isolated the most common battle type, both the number and the name. The next thing I want to do is find the win count for that battle type, because I'm going to try to find his win percentage. And so I already know the total number of times that battle occurred. Now I need to find how many times did our best king win that particular battle type, so I can divide his win count by the total number to get his win percentage. So I'm going to come back down to battle data worksheet one more time. Go ahead and create a new calc. And I'll call this our common battle type win count. And so what I'm going to do here is first I want to filter this table by battle type. So I'm going to go ahead and filter. I'm going to filter on that battle type column. And I'm going to say, let's make sure this is equal to, and then here's where that calc I just created is going to come into play, the single row, single column. Filter to based on a calc, not a value. And I'm going to filter that to our common battle type name. So that's why I had to do that second one where I copied and used select to only say the name, because again, to use it in a filter, it has to be that single row, single column. You'll notice that the one that was just the common battle type is not listed because it had the two columns. So now I'm going to filter based on that most common battle type name. And I only want to see the ones where they won. So we see we have the outcome here, wins and losses. So I'm going to add a secondary filter to say, let's make sure not only is the battle type equal to the most common, but we want to make sure that our attacker outcome is equal to win. Go ahead and save that. And now we get the number of wins for that most common battle type. And then here I'm going to do another aggregation. And I'm going to say, let's just go ahead and do another count on that battle name, because those are unique values. And that's going to give me the total number of wins for that particular battle type. And so that's going to give us our common battle type win count. All right, and so now I have all the values that I need to find the win percentage for our most common battle type. And so to do that, I'm actually going to need to create an additional formula instead of a calculation so that I can divide those two calculations I just created, one from the other, to find the percentage. So I'm going to come here to insert data. I'm going to create a new formula here at the top. I'm going to call this the common battle type win percent. And then I'm going to say, let's take that common battle type win count, which is the number of wins from our king, and let's divide that by the common battle type total count. That's going to divide the wins by the total, and that's going to give us his win percentage. So we go ahead and create that formula. All right, and so now we have two of the three data points that we need. We know the most common battle type. We now have their win percent. The other thing I need to grab real quick is the win percentage when they're on the defense. And so I'll come back to calculate. And for this one, I'm going to go down to my battle defender win percentage, which is very similar to the attacker win percent at the top, but it just shows the win percentage for the defender instead of the attacker. And here I'll just call this attacking king's win percentage as defender king. And so the first thing I'm going to do here is I want to filter this down to make sure that the king we're looking at is the same as our best attacker king, aka the one that's been selected on the dashboard. So I'm going to do another filter. I'm going to filter on the defender king column. I'm going to say let's make sure that it's equal to. Here I'm going to use calc again, and let's make sure it's equal to our best attacker king. And then we only need to know his win percentage, not the name. So I'm going to use the select function and say let's only keep the win percent because we already know the name from those other calcs that we previously created. And now I'll have just the win percentage of our attacker king when he's on defense. So go ahead and save that. All right, and so now we have all the data points that we need to fill in our insight. So I'm going to go and click into my branch, and I'll drop my variables in here real quick. So first we want to put in our unique, or our most common battle type. And then the win percentage, which was our formula. So that's our common battle type win percent. Because this is a percentage, I know I'm going to multiply that by 100. And then my win percentage as a defender king. Oops, let's just do that one maybe. Attacker king win percent as defender king. And this is also a percent, so I'm going to go ahead and multiply that by 100 as well. And fix my spacing, boom. And so now we have our insight completely filled out. We know who our attacker king is, how many defender kings in battles they fought, his most common battle type, the win percentage from that battle type, and his win percent when he's on defense. So that gives people a pretty good idea. When they click on a king from that visualization, we've given them a pretty decent amount of information. And if we want to go check and make sure that is working as understood, we can go ahead and connect our extension to our Wordsmith account. And actually, I'm glad this happened. In case anyone has not done this yet, sometimes whenever you have a new dashboard and you drop your extension in there, or you just haven't opened it in a long time, it kind of logs you out. You may need to re-log in, as I'm doing now, and kind of resync it up. And so once you've logged into Wordsmith, it's going to ask you to create an integration, or you have an option here to connect to an existing integration, which is what we want to do because we already have a template going. So I'll say let's create or connect to an existing integration. And then the drop down will show me all the different integration options that I have based on all the different projects in my account. And I'll just choose the product training template that we've been working in, say connect, and it's going to connect right up. And so we'll
Rob,
notice,
I have a question. So are those integrations basically the worksheets of Tableau?
no, those are the different projects that you have in your Wordsmith account. So like if I come back here to the dashboard for my Wordsmith account, all of these Tableau different projects that I have, those are the integrations that I can connect to.
Okay.
The worksheets in Tableau So like all the worksheets that I have here on my dashboard, those are what we're seeing when we go to calculate, and you have all these different tables or worksheets here. These are all the different worksheets from Tableau up here in calculate.
Okay.
Once you're already connected to the integration. All right, and so I can already see that basically I know that my unique selector branch is working, because when I look at my template, the first thing I have should be my insight that I just wrote, talking about that king and his battles and win percentages and all of that, above example number 5. But when I look in my actual extension, oh, I've already made a selection. Whoops. Spoiler alert. There we go. That's what I was expecting to see. Nothing up there above example number 5, because we had not made a selection, and we've already set up our branch to account for that. But if we do make a selection, then we'll see that it popped up. Here's the king that I've selected, the number of defenders and battles he fought in, his most common battle type, the win percentage, and his win percent as a defender king. So you had like 210, 107. And just so we can make sure that's working properly, let's grab a different king instead, make sure those numbers change. Now we've found that this person fought 4 kings in 5 battles. His most common battle type is the pitched battle instead of the ambush, with a 50% success rate, and his win percent on defense is 0. So we can tell that that is working, and it's accounting for a singular selection. And then if I make no selection, it completely disappears, because of the way we have our branch set up. We're only going to write this if that count equals 1. So if they haven't made a selection, nothing's there. Once they make the selection, it'll pop up. All right, and so we know that our unique selection calc is working and all of our other data points are solid. The next thing we need to do is we need to apply our branching best practices to this insight to account for all the ways this data could change. And so basically I'm just going to work our way down and work sentence by sentence to improve or apply those branching best practices to make sure we've accounted for everything that could potentially happen with our data. And so the very first thing I want to do is I want to branch for plurals. And so when I look at my first sentence here, I can see that he fought against 3 defender kings in 7 battles. But what if he only fought against 1 defender king, or in 1 battle? We wouldn't want those to be plural, because 1 defender kings obviously is not grammatically correct. And so I need to account for the fact that there may only be 1 in either of these values. And so my first one here is the best attacker king values, king count. And so if I highlight the S here in defender kings, I'm going to add a branch. And I'm going to say if that best attacker king count is greater than 1, then we're going to write the S. And for this particular branch, I don't need to create another rule that says, if it's less than 1, don't write the S, because the way our branches are set up, we're only going to write this if the rule is true. So if it's greater than 1, then we know that it's going to be plural. It'll write the S. If it's less than 1, or I'm sorry, if it is not greater than 1, aka it's just 1, then it's not going to write the S, and it would be singular. And we can do the same thing here for battles. This variable is our best attacker king name count. And so if I highlight the S, add a branch, and I say let's look at that value. If it's greater than 1. Only if it's greater than 1 do we write the S to make it plural. If it's not greater than 1, it'll just leave the S off, and that period scoots right over, so it would be 1 battle singular. All right, and so there we've taken care of the potential singular versus plural issue. The next thing I want to do is if I come down here and look at my second sentence where I talk about the most common battle type, I need to account for the fact that there might be a tie in that most common battle type. And so we're going to have to do the same thing we did in our previous session, same thing we did in our homework, create another calc and probably a list to see if there's a tie in this most common battle type. So I'm going to go ahead and hit done, pop out of the branch, come up here to calculate. I'm going to go back down to my battle data where I'm going to be working quite a bit. And I'm going to create a new, actually, I'm not even going to create a new calc. Here I'm just going to duplicate my previous calc of common battle type. So I'm just going to make a copy. And here I'm going to call this my common battle type count. And so I know that In an upcoming calc, I'm going to filter by the number of that most common battle type. And so just like I did previously where I isolated the name to use in a filter, here I'm going to isolate the count to use in a filter. So I'm going to use that select function, but instead of saving the type, I'm going to instead save the count. Save that. And now I have the number of times that most common battle type occurred saved as a single row, single column, which I can now use in a filter in an additional calc. So I'll go ahead and save that. And now I'm going to go ahead and come back down to my battle data worksheet. And I'm actually going to duplicate that initial common battle type calc one more time. And I could create all this from scratch, but it's already in there. So why not take advantage of what we've already done? And now I'm going to call this my common battle type list. Go ahead and copy that calc. All right, and so we've already filtered our table to show that, make sure the battle type is not null, and then we're grouping by the battle type. And then we did our sorting in our first in. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to revert back to this grouping step. And so I'm going to say, let's revert back here to step number 2 so that I have the name and the count of the battles. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and apply my filter because I'm only looking for, how many different battles match the number that is also the most common, which we know is this 14. So I'm going to filter, and I'm going to say, let's filter on the count and make sure that's equal to, reference our calc again, and let's make sure that's equal to the common battle type count that we just saved. So now it's only going to show battles with the number that is equal to the most common battle type. Go ahead and save that step. And then we can use select to save just the battle type name. And then just like we did before, this is saving it as a single text item, but we need to manually change this to a list so that we have more than one. We can insert those into our branch and it can display all the various battles if there happens to be a tie. So I'm going to go ahead and say, let's change this data type. And instead of text, we're going to make that a list. And we're going to say this is a list of text items. Go ahead and update. We can see it's now switched over to list. And now I can save this as my common battle type list. So now I have 2 variables. We have the common battle type, which shows the name and the count, or the common battle type name, which shows just the name in a singular text field. And we have the list, which shows one or more names in a list format if there happens to be more than one. So now that I've done that, I can go ahead and pop back over here to my branch. Oops, I'm in the wrong one. There we go. And so here, I'm going to say, I'm going to highlight this entire second sentence. I'm going to add a branch. And then I'm going to look at that common battle type list that I just created. I'm going to do a count of that list. And I'm going to say, if that equals 1, then we can just go ahead and leave our insight as is because it's already written to account for one particular king. And then I'll go ahead and just copy this logic to a new rule. And I'll say if this is greater than 1, so we have 2 or more, which tells me there is a tie. And actually, we're going to do 3. So let's say instead of greater than 1, let's say that's equal to 2. Then if there's 2 in our list, I'm going to say as an attacking king, he has 2 favorites in terms of battle type, the number 1 most common and the number 2 most common. And so to fill this in, I'm going to highlight this, come to my insert data variable. I'm looking for my common battle type list. Go ahead and select it. And then if you remember from our list formatting options, we have this list settings dropdown here. If I leave it on none, it's going to list out all the different battle types there are. And so if I just said like in my insight, as an attacking king, his most favorite battle types are, and then just list them all out, that would be fine to leave it on none. However, the way I have my insight written, I need to say his most favorite are this particular one, number 1, and then the number 2 item from that list, not list out everything at once. So here I'm going to say only display the first item, hit back, and then I'm going to insert that exact same variable again. And then I'm going to use list settings, and I'm going to say let's use the nth and show only the second item. So now it's going to list the first and then the second one from the list. And I'll go ahead and duplicate this logic one more time. And here I'll say if it's greater than 2, then we're just going to say he does not have a strong preference for any particular battle type. So if there's only 1, we'll leave as is, talk about what the battle is and their success rate. If there's 2, we're going to list out what those 2 happen to be. And if there's more than 2, then we'll just say he does not have a strong preference either way. So now we've accounted for not only a tie, but more than 2, basically all the different ways that our data could change for this particular insight. Oops. All right. And so the next thing I want to do is I'm going to stay in this branch here for just a second. And in my 3 branches, the first one where we talk about he tends to engage in this particular battle type. If you remember, there were 4 different battles that we saw. There's the pitch battle, the siege, the ambush, and the something else. I don't remember what the 3rd one or 4th one was. But let's say that his most common battle type happens to be ambush. It would not be grammatically correct to say he tends to engage in ambush. It would be ambushes. And so, or like right here, he tends to engage in pitched battle, should be pitched battles, plural. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a branch to account for, do I need to add an S or an ES, depending on the battle type. Ambush should be changed to ambushes, ES. All the others can just have an S to make them plural. So if I put my S or my cursor here at the end of the variable, pre-comma, go ahead and add a branch. I'm going to say, let's look at the common battle type. If that equals ambush, then we want to write ES. And then I'm going to say, if that is not true, then we're just going to write an S. And so now we'd have pitched battles, sieges, whatever the other one was that I can't remember. But if it's ambush, then it would say ambush ES, ambushes. So everything would be grammatically correct. Then I can just hit back. The other thing I'll point out here, and I may have mentioned this in our previous session as well, you can see this looks a little strange where it says battle ease, and clearly doesn't look right. But remember, when we have a branch, it always shows the first rule in your template, but that's not necessarily what's going to be written in the narrative. And so you'll see here where it looks strange, but we know that because this battle type is not ambush, it's actually only going to write the S. We may be able to see that in our preview over here. Nope, because we haven't selected anything. But we'll see when we go to our actual dashboard that that'll come out correct. All right. So the last thing that we have to do here is count for our Defender King's win percentage. We just want to make sure that we actually have his percent here. Otherwise, there's no point in writing this sentence. So we want to do a null check to make sure this value is not empty. If it is empty, this in last sentence is useless, and so we want to leave it off. So I'm going to highlight just that last sentence. I'm going to add a branch, and I'm just going to say, let's make sure that that attacking king win percent as defender king is not null. If it's not null, we'll go ahead and keep that insight. If it is null, we're not bother writing it, because again, if we don't know the percentage, that whole sentence is useless. And so now we've basically accounted for all the various changes that our data could have, plurals, ties, grammar, null values, and so on. And so this one is pretty much done. And now if I come back to my dashboard, and let's say we make a selection, we'll start with this one, why not? Again, we can see that here's the Defender Kings and battles, but that was the same. But now this lets us check our ambush grammar that we just set up. So we can see as an attacking king, he engages in ambushes with 100% success rate. And as a defending king, his win percent is 7. If we choose a different one, here we can see that our branching for tie checking is working. So now I can see as an attacking king, he has 2 favorites in terms of types, the pitched battle and the siege. And again, because of the way that's written, we don't need to make these plural like we did for the branch where there's only one, because the pitched battle and the siege is grammatically correct. We don't need to add s's or es's to the end of those. And then his defending king, his win percent is 0. And here, actually, if we choose that top one, we can even see the third choice works, where he clearly has more than 2 that are equal. And so he does not have a strong preference for any particular type. So we can see that all 3 of those options did in fact work. And if we make no selection, nothing shows up. So we know that our unique selection branch is also working. So that particular one is set, and we've now accounted for someone making a unique selection in the attacker king visualization. The other one that we're going to account for here is if someone, once they've made an attacking king selection, what if they also select one of these battles? And so we now need to account for someone selecting a battle and give them some relevant information about that battle. And so if we look at our previous insight, where we talked about the battle was the most imbalanced, in which this person suffered a win or loss against this other person, despite having this many more or fewer people in his army. We're actually going to just scrap that whole thing, and we're going to write an entirely new insight. So now we're going to say the battle was this particular type fought in this region during the summer or winter. And then we're going to say there was a major capture and a major death, or one or the other. There was a major capture but no death, or death but no capture. And so for this, since we're going to do an entirely new insight, I'm going to go ahead and just drop this down here out of our way as well, and we'll just start from a blank slate. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste in my new insight, which is this. And I'm going to need to create some calcs to pull in these various data points, as well as also account for, did someone make a unique selection in that battle visualization? And so first I'm going to need to do another calc to determine, has the unique selection for battle been made? So I'll come back here to my battle data worksheet, create a new calc, and just like we did unique attacker king count, here let's do the unique battle count. But let's do it the second way. So the first one, where I did the attacker king, I went with get the unique values, do an aggregate count, and then say in the branch, does that count equal 1? For this one, just so you can see that they work the same way, let's create a list and then do a count of that list. And so here I'm going to call this our unique battle count. And then I'm going to do the unique function on the battle name, because that's a unique identifier, which will give me the unique battles. So here's all the different battles that they're going to be able to choose from in that visualization. It's already in a list, so I'm just going to save that. Actually, let's just call this a unique battle count list. And then, just like we did with our attacker king, we can highlight this part, add a branch, and I'll say, let's make sure that unique battle count list, do a count of the list. Does that count equal 1? The only way it's going to equal 1 is if they have selected a unique battle from the list, and then we'll get our insight. If I go ahead and save it here at this point, and we refresh, you'll see that we have the information from our king, which has been selected, but this placeholder insight that I have with all these data points that need filled in is not showing up because we have not made a selection. If I do make a selection, now it's going to show up. There's nothing there because we haven't pulled in the data points yet, but you can see that at least the selection branching is working. If I deselect, it goes away. All right, and so now we've accounted for that unique battle selection. Just like we did in a previous insight, we need to go ahead and pull these data points out using calcs so that we can fill in our insight. So I'll come here to the Calculate tab, and First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a calc called battle selection, which is going to come from our battle data worksheet. And this is basically going to let me pull in several of those data points in one singular calc. So I'm just going to call this, battle selection. And then here, I'm going to sort this. I'm going to say, let's sort on the attacker's size in descending order. And that's going to pull in. So normally I could have just said, let's keep the first in, because this is all battle data. And once they click, it's going to filter it down anyway. But I want to sort by attacker size and descending, just so that I'll make sure that I have a battle with all the fields filled in for my future formula. Just because I know that particular one doesn't have any null values. But if I were doing this for real, I could have just used first in without the sorting. But I'm going to sort for my upcoming formula. I'm going to grab the first in, and then I only need to keep certain columns as data points that I'm going to use in my insight. So I'll use the select function, and here I'm going to say, let's keep the battle name. Let's also keep the battle type, the region, because we wanted to know where that battle took place. Was it in the summer or the winter? So we'll keep the summer or winter field. And then we also were going to talk about, was there a major death or capture? So I'll keep the major capture and the major death columns. Save and get rid of all the other columns that I don't need. And now I basically have all those data points that I was looking for in one calc. And so I'll go ahead and save that. And now I can come back and start filling in my data points. So first we'll put in the battle. So that's our battle name. Battle selection name. And then our type. Oops. And our region. Summer or winter. This summer or winter value is a Boolean, 0 or 1. And so 0 is summer, or 1 is summer, 0 is winter. And so we'll have to do some branching to change that to a word instead of during the 0 or the 1. And I'm not going to bother with major capture or death just yet, because I'm going to do some branching around that as well. So we'll go ahead and just leave this as is. We've got most of our data points filled in, and we can go ahead and start applying our branching best practices. So we've already set up our branch to account for the unique battle selection. The next thing I want to do is I want to do some null checks to make sure that we have values in our table for most of these data points. Otherwise, we may want to leave them out. And so I know that region, the battle name and the region is never going to be null. And so I'm going to check the battle type, whether it occurred during the summer or winter, and the major capture or death. Because if we don't have some of these, we can still write an insight that would make sense. Let's say we didn't know the battle type. We could still say the Battle of Castle Black was fought beyond the wall during the winter. If we didn't know the type, that would still make sense. Or let's say we didn't know if it was summer or winter, but we did know the type and the region. We could say, the Battle of Castle Black was a siege fought beyond the wall, period. We don't need to know whether it was summer or winter for that to make sense. So we just want to do null checks on some of these values. That way, if they are null, we can drop them out, but we'll still be able to deliver an insight that gives them some sort of information. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to highlight this here where it says was a siege. I'm going to add a branch, and I'm going to say, let's make sure that battle selection, battle type is not null. If it's not null, it'll write it out. If it is null, it'll leave that off. And then again, it would just say the battle was fought without talking about what type. Same thing. We want to grab the during the summer or winter. And this was our battle selection summer. Let's make sure that is not null. Oops. If it's not, we'll go ahead and write that out. And notice I did not grab the period in this branch. Whenever you start getting down to these branching best practices, I may have mentioned this last time as well, but you want to be very careful about what you are or are not picking up if you're trying to set up a branch to leave something out. In this case, if this summer variable is null, it's not going to write during the zero or summer winter. And so when that drops off, we want that period to go ahead and scoot right over and end the sentence after beyond the wall. So if I put the period in the branch, it would not be written, and then we would not have a period at the end of our sentence. So we want to make sure we do not pick that up in the branch. Same thing, you'll notice I grabbed the blank space here between that last word and during. That way, if it does not get written, not only will it leave the phrase out, but it'll take that space and the period would be right where it belongs next to the word instead of having a blank space in between the word and the period. So there is a bit of attention to detail that's needed when you start fine-tuning these branches or doing your best practices, because you want to make sure that you're picking up or leaving out the right blank spaces and not grabbing punctuation when necessary so that it doesn't get left off. And we can check all of that towards the end here when we go through some of our QA tools. I'll show you some ways you can really quickly look over that to make sure everything looks good. All right, so one other final null check. I'm going to grab this whole sentence here because if we don't have if we have a null value for either capture or death, we don't really want to write this because we're going to be doing some math on these. And so I'm going to add a branch and say, let's make sure that major capture is not null and major death is not null. So we only want to write that if we have both. And so if all the stuff that's in blue drops out, so let's say these are all null, even though probably never going to be, just in worst case scenario, all of these are null. At the very least, we could say the Battle of Castle Black, whoops, I just picked up the wrong word. So here's an example right there. I was not very careful, and I picked up was a siege. I should have only picked up a siege. And so I'm going to take that out, and then I'll just enter it back here manually. So it would say the Battle of Castle Black was fought beyond the wall. And that still gives them some information about the battle, if God forbid all these others are null. All right, and so now that we've accounted for the nulls, we need to branch for some specific values. So the first thing I want to do here is we can see that already this does not make a whole lot of sense because you would not say was fought in beyond the wall. And so for our region, most of the regions are like the winter, the north, the riverlands, things like that, where in makes sense. In the north, in the riverlands, in the south, wherever the battle happens to be. However, beyond the wall is the one region where in doesn't really make sense. We should just say was fought beyond the wall. And so I want to set up a branch to say if the region is beyond the wall, let's take out this word in because it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I'm going to grab the word in my branch. I'm also going to pick up this blank space after it so that if it doesn't get written, this will scoot over. There's only one space in between fought and the value. And I'm going to add another branch here. I'm going to say, let's take a look at that battle selection region. And let's make sure that it does not equal beyond the wall. And I think I mentioned this last time, and I'll go ahead and point it out again. If you are referencing a specific text string from your data table, such as beyond the wall, you do want to make sure you put that in double quotes, and you want to make sure that it is case sensitive, or the case matches what's in the table because it is case sensitive, I guess would be a better way to say that. And so now if this region is not beyond the wall, it's going to write the word in with that space. If it is beyond the wall, which it is right now, it's going to leave that off. And again, we don't need to create a second rule or a default branch because it's only going to write this if it's not beyond the wall, which is the only time that we want it. So we can go ahead and say back here. And now we've picked up or changed the branching there to account for that particular value. Next thing I want to do is I want to fix my during the zero to say summer or winter because during the zero doesn't really make a lot of sense either. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight just the variable of 0. I'm going to add a branch. And here I'm just going to say if that battle selection summer equals 1, not Q, then we're going to write out the word summer, And I'll just copy this logic and say instead if it equals 0, then we'll write out the word winter. So now we know, did the battle occur in the summer or in the winter? All right, and so the next thing I want to do is I want to branch for some sentence structure here to figure out the major capture and a major death. Was there both a major capture and a death, or was there a major capture but no death, or a major death but no capture? And so to do that, I'm going to come into here. I've already done my null check, and again, we're only going to write this if we have both of those values. And so I'm going to branch around both a major capture and death. I'm not going to pick up the period, and I'm not going to pick up there was, because it's going to be written whether we say, there was both a capture and a death, there was a capture but no death, or there was a death but no capture. There was is always going to begin the sentence. And so again, one of those kind of unwritten branching rules is don't repeat yourself. And so rather than picking up the whole sentence and in each one of my rules writing out the word there was 3 different times, that gives you 3 opportunities to misspell a word, mess up spacing, things like that. Anything that is not going to change, make sure we leave that out of the branch so that it only occurs one time, less chance for error, as well as less redundancy. It's not going to hurt anything if you do pick it up. It just gives you more opportunity to make errors. Or if you wanted to change the wording, you'd have to go change it in 2, 3, however many different rules that you write versus just this one place. All right, so I picked up here with just what's going to change. I'm going to add a branch. And here I'm going to say, let's look at that battle selection, major capture. And this is also a 0 or a 1. So 1 would indicate there was a capture, 0, there's not. Same with death, 1 would indicate there was a major death, 0 would indicate there was not. So we're going to say if capture equals 1 and major death also equals 1, then we're going to say there was both a major capture and a major death. I did not get the period in the branch, so I don't want to type it here. That's the other thing. If you are careful and you don't pick up your punctuation in your branch, you want to also make sure you don't accidentally type that punctuation in your rule, because then when that gets written, we're going to have 2 periods, which also, again, is not correct. So branching, close eye on attention to detail. Otherwise, you end up with small little things like that, which sometimes are hard to catch until you output your narrative and maybe you have a big audience of people looking at it and you're like, oh no, there's 2 periods or something like that, which is not a huge deal, but it's definitely worth paying attention to. Okay, so we've accounted for the fact that there are both of these. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another rule here. And I'm going to say, what if major capture is 1 or major death is 1? Then I'm going to write out the fact that there was a major capture or death, but no major capture or death. And then I'm going to need to branch within. So for here where we have capture or death, let's say I'm going to pick up that, add another branch, and here I'm going to say if that major capture equals 1 and major death equals 0, then we would say there was a capture, and we can copy that logic, and we'll just flip these numbers around. So capture now equals 0 and death equals 1. Then there was a death. And then when we come over here to the other side, we're going to do that exact same thing, but basically in reverse, because now we're saying there was no. And so when I do my branching here, if I say major death equals 0 and capture equals 1, then we'll say there was no death. And then we'll copy this. We'll flip our numbers around. And then here we'll put capture. And so we did the exact same branching, we just flip-flopped the numbers. So on the affirmative side, there was a major. Capture is 1, we write capture. Death is 1, we write death, because there was one of those. On the other side, where we're saying there was no, if death equals 0, then we write death. Whereas in that first one, if death equals 1, we wrote it out. And if death equals 1 here, we write capture. Capture equals 0. On the first one, if capture equaled 1, we wrote capture. And so now we can say there was a major capture but no death, or a major death but no capture. And then I'm going to add a default rule here to say, if neither of those are true, then we'll just say there was neither a major capture nor death. And so now we've accounted for all the possibilities here. There was both, there was one or the other, or there was neither one. All right, and so as far as what we have in here, we've already we've applied our branching best practices, and we've accounted for all the various scenarios that we could have in this insight as it's currently written. However, there are one or two additional improvements here that we're going to make. We're going to add some additional insight if specific conditions are met. And so here, I'm going to add another line about this battle. I'm going to leave my cursor right here against it, and actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll go ahead and space that out. And so I'm going to add some additional insight to say the battle was incredibly imbalanced, as the attacker, who ultimately won or lost, had this many times more men than the defender. But we're only going to write this if the attacker to defender ratio, or the defender to attacker ratio, is greater than 2. So we only want to write this if one side was outnumbered by 2 times more than their opponent. And so the way we're going to figure that up is I'll go ahead and say done here for just a second. And we need to create a calc and a formula to pull in these ratios. And so first I'm going to come back up here to calculate. I'm going to go back down to battle data. I'm going to create another calc here. Oh, nope. I'm just going to edit my battle selection calc. And I'm going to add 2 more columns here to the select function. So I've already grabbed, oops, go back there. My select step that I have over here, I'm actually just going to edit this. So previously I reverted to a step, and you saw that it took me back to a step and it got rid of everything that was down below. In this particular one, I'm just going to edit the step instead of reverting, which lets me build onto what I've already done. And I'm just going to add 2 additional columns here, which would be the attacker size and the defender size. I'm going to keep everything else I had, just add those 2 in. So now I know the army sizes for the attacking and defending armies within this battle. Go ahead and save that step. And then I can save my calc. All right, and so now that I've added those 2 data points in, now I can create a formula. I'm going to create 2 different formulas. One is going to be my attacker to defender ratio. And here I'm going to say, let's look at that battle selection attacker size and divide that by the battle selection defender size. So that gives me my attacker to defender ratio. And then I'm going to create another formula. I'm going to do the same thing, but in reverse. So we'll call this our defender to attacker ratio. And so now I'm going to take my battle selection defender size and divide that by my battle selection attacker size. Boom, right there. And that's going to give me my defender to attacker ratio. So go ahead and create that. And now that I have these 2 ratios, I'm going to create a branch. So I'm going to go back in here to my insight. I'm going to branch around this entire thing, because again, we only want to write this if that ratio is greater than 2. And I also need to do a null check to make sure that attacker and defender sizes are not null, because we did create those formulas. If either of those values are null, the formulas are not going to work. So we're not going to want to try to write this sentence at all. So I'm going to pick up the whole sentence, including that space. I'm going to add a branch. And first I'll just say, let's make sure that battle selection attacker size is not null, and battle selection defender size also is not null. All right, and so now the other thing I wanted to do is, again, I only want to write this out if the ratio is greater than 2. So I'm going to highlight this whole thing again. I'm going to branch around it, and I'm going to say, let's make sure that attacker to defender ratio is greater than 2, or the defender to attacker ratio is also greater than 2. If one of those is not greater than 2, we're also not going to write this out. So now we've set up our conditions for when this would be written. Now I need to do some branching to pull in my data points and to account for the fact that maybe they won or lost. Where are we talking about, the attacker or the defender? And so I'm going to set up 2 different branches here. I'm going to say the battle is incredibly imbalanced, as the attacker, who ultimately won, had this many times more men. I'm going to grab this part of my sentence because we may want to talk about the defender. They may have won or lost, and those could all change. So I'm going to pick those up. I'm going to add a branch. And then within here, I'm going to create 2 different kind of forks like we did in our previous session with the one of those examples. So here I'm going to say, let's create my attacker to defender ratio fork or branch. And then I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to do that same thing for my defender, to attacker. Oh my goodness. There we go. So if the attacker to defender ratio is greater than 2, we want to write this out as we're talking from the attacker's perspective. If instead the defender side is greater than 2, then we want to write this out as if we're talking from the defender perspective. And so here, now I need to pull in my outcome. Did they win or lose? So I'm going to highlight the word won. I'm going to add a branch. And this would be our attacker minus defender outcome. Does that equal win? If so, we'll write the word won, and then we'll copy that to a new rule. Does that equal loss? If so, then we'll write the word lost. So now we've accounted for the fact that they may have won or lost. And then the other thing I want to do is do that same thing on my defender side. So I'm going to highlight one here, add a branch. Oops. And now I'm going to do it from the defender side. So if that outcome equals win, then we're again going to say they won. Copy that. If the equals loss, then we'll instead say they lost. And then I also want to pop in my ratios here. So I'm going to add my attacker to defender. Actually, let's just type out ratio. And then here, put in my defender to attacker ratio instead. And I might want to go ahead and throw like 1 decimal place on there, just because it might be a small number. All right, and so now we'll be able to say, the attacker who ultimately won or lost had this many times more men than their opponent, or the defender who won or lost had this many times more men. And we've accounted for both sides, attacking and defender, and we've updated our verbiage to reflect which side we're talking about and put in the correct ratio as well as the outcome. All right. And so now we've added a little additional insight, a little flavor there if those specific conditions are met. There's really one other thing that I want to do here. Or actually, yeah, one other thing. So when we're looking up here where we say the Battle of Castle Black was a siege, we have the battle name and the type. For some of these battle names, instead of being the Battle of such and such, if the battle is a siege, generally it's going to say the siege of, like the siege of Winterfell or the siege of whatever castle. It would be redundant to say the siege of Winterfell was a siege. And so if the battle name has the word siege in it, we probably want to take out the fact that we mentioned that it was a siege so that it's not redundant. And so here, I'm going to come into this A battle type branch that I've already set up where I'm making sure it's not null. I'm going to add an additional condition here where I'm going to say, and let's make sure that the battle selection battle type excludes. And so once we enter the value or the variable, you'll see the various functions that we can do. And one of the things is you can search the text field to say, does it include or exclude this particular string? So I'm going to say, let's make sure it excludes the word siege. And then you can see kind of how it's formatted, just like we did the counting of a list, where you had the count function, then the name of the list that you wanted to count. Here, we put the exclude function, and then within parentheses, the name of the variable that we're looking at, and the particular string that's being searched. And so we're going to say only write this if it is not null, and if the battle type excludes the word siege. So if it is a siege, it's not going to mention that. It would just say the siege of Winterfell was fought beyond the wall or wherever it was fought, as opposed to the siege of Winterfell was a siege and being redundant. All right, and so there's one other thing that we're going to do here real quick to make this completely ready to go. And so we have a lot of limiting factors in our insight. We could basically lose everything that's in the branching here. And if somebody clicked on a battle, maybe it would just say the Battle of Castle Black was fought beyond the wall, period. That's not really a lot of stuff, or that's not really relevant enough information to deliver just the name and where it was fought. So we want to make sure that we're going to have at least 2 data points. Otherwise, we don't want to write this at all. So beyond just the name and where it was fought, we want to make sure that we can tell them, what type of battle it was, and if it was in the summer or winter, or was it in the summer and winter and there was a capture and death. We want to make sure we have at least 2 additional data points beyond the name and the region. And so I'm going to highlight this entire thing. I'm going to add a branch. And I'm going to add in, I'm going to paste all this in, and then we can kind of walk through it just because I don't want to take the time to type all this out. All right, and so basically what we're saying here is, let's make sure that if the battle type is siege, then we know that we're already going to lose this branch where it says it's a siege. And so if that's the case, we want to make sure that we at least have the summer is not null, or capture and death are not null. So we're going to have the summer and this additional line because we know we're losing that right off the bat. Or if the battle type is not siege, then we want to make sure that the battle type is not null, or summer is not null, or death and capture both are not null. So again, we're going to have it, if the battle type is or is not siege, we're going to be able to deliver at least 2 additional data points along with the name and the region. If none of those are true, then we're not going to write this out. So here, I'm going to add a default rule where I say there is limited information on this battle. And so if we can't deliver at least 2 additional data points, we're just going to instead say there's limited information on this battle. All right, and so now we've pretty much accounted for all the scenarios, including the fact that we don't have much information on the battle. And so if we pop back over to our dashboard, we have our information about our selected king. And now if we select a battle here, let's say this one, we can see that the Battle of the Green Fork, it was a pitched battle fought in the Riverlands during the summer. There was both a major capture and a major death. There's not a whole lot of discrepancy in the army sizes here, so we're not getting that additional insight. However, if I do this one, maybe we'll get it. Yep, so here we go. For this one, there was a major capture and a death. It was incredibly imbalanced as the defender, which is the one in red, who ultimately won, had 3.2 times more men. We can do some rough math here real quick and see that 1.875 is probably 3.2 times less than 6,000. So that all seems to check out. I know that the defender side is the one in red, and so looks like we're all good there. Maybe if you want to check another one, we can choose a different king. And we can pick a different battle. Battle of the Black Water, pitched battle, fought in the Crown Lands during the summer. There was a major capture and a death. It was incredibly imbalanced as the attacker, who ultimately lost, had 3 times more men. 7,000 times 3, 21,000. It's a little bit of rounding, but pretty generally correct. So we can see that all of that is working, and if we don't select the battle, it goes away because we haven't made a unique selection. Same thing, don't choose a king. It goes away as well, and we have to make a choice first and then second to get both of those data points to show up. So we can basically see that real time, everything we set up is working. I can't remember if we talked about it in the previous session. I know we're coming up at the end of time, so if people have to drop off, you have other commitments or something, feel free. I am recording this, and so there's a few things I want to run through. That way, if you have to go back and look at the recording, you'll have it. If you can stick around, that's great. There's just 1 or 2 things I want to show you, and then like 2 more slides in the PowerPoint, and we're good to go. Within the editor itself, or within the app, once you have set up all of your insights and your branching and everything like that, if you want to go back and do a little QA on this, there's 2 ways that you can do it. One, you can do like I just did, go into your actual dashboard, click around, make sure things look the way you expect. But you can also do some QA from within here using the Tools menu. There's an outline, which is going to show you all the different things that are in your template. And then let's say I click to expand this out, and you can just keep expanding. Actually, I'll just go and expand all. Here I can see each branch that I have set up, what's going to be written. You can even turn on the logic, so you can see for the branch, here's the logic that's being used. There's what's written if it's true. Here's another branch. There's the logic. Here's what's written. You can see every little bit. And then if you decide that you want to change, the variable is used, you want to change the branching, anything like that, you can see that these all light up and are clickable. So you can click anywhere in the outline, and it takes you to that exact spot within the branch or within the template, so you can quickly make some edits. If you notice a spelling error, grammar error, you just want to change something, click wherever you want, and it takes you right to that spot in the template. So you can use the outline to quickly navigate around, spot obvious errors. We also have a data tester, which you can use in conjunction with our preview over here to make sure that things show up the way you think, as well as see which of your branches are resolving as true. So let's go up here in this first one. We've got like 3 different branches here. I can see that the battle type list currently is resolving true, where it shows there's only 1. And if I go look at that variable, here's my common battle type list. There is in fact only 1 battle in it. So let's say I'll put a second one. Now that there are 2, we can see that the branch for 2 is resolving as true. And then maybe I add a third one. We can now see that the one that is greater than 2 is resolving as true. So you can use the data tester to kind of manipulate the data. You're not really changing it, you're just manipulating it here in this test environment so that you can see your branches resolve the way you expect. And then you can just reset, and it goes back to what's in the actual underlying data. So those are the 2 main tools that you're going to want to use, the outline and the data tester. There's also a spell check, which is just your common spell check. We've all used one of those. It works like any other spell check you've ever used. So that's kind of the QA tools that you're going to have in your app. Data tester, outline, combined with actually testing by clicking on your dashboard and seeing what comes up in your visuals or in your extension. And then real quick, the other things that I wanted to point out here within the PowerPoint, just a couple notes for creating some custom sheets in Tableau. The first one here is best practices for your worksheets. is basically you want to check your summary data for format of your columns. And it's been a long time. We probably talked about this in the first session, but it's probably worth pointing out because that was way back in February. And so whenever you're trying to figure out what is being sent from Tableau to Wordsmith, um, select your visualization. And if you come up here to analysis and view data, it's going to show you the summary data tab. And so here is what Wordsmith is sending from that visualization, or what Tableau is sending from that visualization over to Wordsmith. In this case, the Kings and their win percentages. Um, if I choose one, let's say I choose like Rob Stark, this is a filtered table. And so now when I go back to view data, I can see that it's only sending the filtered selection. So you can always check to see what's being sent. If data that you need is not being sent by a particular visualization, you may want to create a hidden sheet that you can use to pass that information over, but is not actually represented by a visualization on the dashboard. Whenever you are creating those hidden sheets as well, make sure you don't have columns with the same names. That's usually just best practice anywhere, especially if you're doing table aggregations, but just in general, make sure your columns all have unique names. Otherwise, it's going to mess up your variables because the column names are what become the variable names. Edit integration to make updates to your sheets. This is also really good to know. Sometimes when you're in Tableau, you're either going to need to add a new sheet of data, or maybe you update one of your existing sheets. So let's say I'm going to add a new sheet. I'll just add a new worksheet, and I'm just going to throw a couple random things on here. Okay. So let's say now that I want to add this new sheet to my Wordsmith integration. I'm going to add it to my dashboard, and let's add it as a floating object. I'll shrink it way down, tuck it away over here somewhere where nobody's going to see it, or probably click on it somewhere up there. But I want to get that data from this sheet 11 into my Wordsmith account. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to come here to my extension within Tableau. I'm going to click these three dots, and I'm going to come down here to where it says Edit Integration. It may or may not ask you for your password, depending on how long it's been since you logged in. And so essentially there's two different things that we're going to do depending on the update that we made. If you added an entirely new sheet like I just did, then once this page comes up, you're going to want to click the drop down, find that new sheet, and then hit Save Table to put it over here in the side of tables that you're already using. Now that it's here, I can hit Save. It'll now show up in my Wordsmith account, and I can do calcs. If, however, you did not add a whole new sheet, you just edited one of your existing sheets, maybe you added a new measure, you took something off, you did a different calculation, you updated the sheet in any way, all you have to do to put that into Wordsmith is open up this integration page and then just hit save to resave it. Once you resave it, it resyncs with Wordsmith, and any updates to your sheet will be passed over. If you did the entirely new sheet, that's where you have to select it, save it, then save the integration, and that will resync it with Wordsmith. So now that I've done that, if I go back into my Wordsmith account and I go to calculate, we can see that that new sheet 11 is already here, and I can start creating calcs off of that data as well. The same thing would be true if you just updated, like maybe I updated this attacker win percentage. Once you save your integration, any of your updates will be immediately visible in Wordsmith as well. Then the last little tip that doesn't need to be said, but it's always good to reinforce that one. Just double and triple check your filters. Make sure you're properly including or excluding anything from your dashboard or your sheets that you want to be including or excluding. And that's really easy. You can just look over your dashboard. If something is or is not filtered, make sure that your filters are set up the way you expect. Same thing for your hidden sheets. If you're filtering data, just always double, triple check that to make sure you're sending over what you expect to be sending, because especially when people start making selections, as you've just seen, that can really affect how the narratives turn out, whether if you are or are not filtering. So just make sure your filters are doing what you expect them to do. And then last but not least, a couple additional resources. Just like last time, I'll send you guys this recording. I'll also send you the PowerPoint. There are a couple helpful links here at the end. There's a link to our knowledge base, just the general knowledge base, as well as the kind of specific BI section, which covers a lot of the Tableau information. In the knowledge base itself, there are a couple of pages that I do like. Whoops, that's the wrong one. That's the API. There's our regular knowledge base. So a few pages that people typically find really helpful um, when they're going out and doing things on their own for the first time. Here on the left, under the template writing branches section, this branch logic syntax guide can be super helpful. It's going to tell you, here are the different rules that we can use. It'll give you examples. It'll show you for like number data types. Here are all the different math operators and things we can do. And then it'll show you for text, here are the functions and attributes you can use, dates. It breaks down each data type and shows you all the different syntax that you can use in your branches. How to write a branch, we basically covered all this, but if you ever need a reminder, you can also check that out. But the syntax guide, people typically find extremely helpful. And then specifically for BI, there's a Wordsmith for BI section down here where you can go through Wordsmith for business intelligence. There's some videos you can watch. There's all sorts of learning modules and things you can drop down and go through that'll take you back through all the stuff that we just did in training, as well as some specific sections on like how to plan out what you want to write, how to do your dashboard worksheets, how to set up the integration, and then how to perform calcs in the calc builder. So all that could be helpful. If you do need help beyond the knowledge base, we certainly have support available Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 or 6 p.m. I don't believe people work over the weekend, but they'll get to your request first thing Monday morning if you happen to run into an issue over the weekend. Just send it to help@automatedinsights.com, or if you're inside of the app, you can come down here to the contact us and you can start a live chat or send an email. They both go to the same spot and somebody will be able to help you out.